The Texas sun hung heavy over the Cross family residence, casting golden rays on the well-kept lawn and white picket fence. Inside, the atmosphere was warm, bustling with the laughter and chatter of 5 children. Daniel Cross, a 42-year-old preacher and respected pillar of the community, sat at the head of the dining table, his hands folded in prayer. His wife, Rachel, a graceful and devoted partner, stood by his side, ensuring every detail of their dinner ran smoothly. Daniel's sermons on faith, family, and forgiveness had made him beloved in the town. Every Sunday, the pews of his church were filled with followers who looked to him as a moral compass. He wasn't just a preacher. He was a friend, a father figure, and a beacon of light for many. Beside him, Rachel was no less admired. With her calm demeanor and tireless dedication to her 5 children, Emma, Liam, Ethan, Chloe, and Mason, she was often seen as the glue that held the family together. At the center of this harmonious family stood Samuel Cross, Daniel's father. A 65-year-old deacon, Samuel had long been a respected elder in the church, a man whose wisdom and unwavering faith had shaped Daniel into the man he was. To Daniel, his father was not only a role model, but a living testament to righteousness. The family had a cherished tradition: Sunday dinners at Samuel's house. These evenings were filled with scripture readings, lively debates about faith, and laughter. For Daniel, these moments were a testament to the strength of their family bond, a symbol of the life he had built around his faith and values. But it was during one such dinner that the first crack in their perfect picture appeared. 16-year-old Emma, the eldest of the Cross children, spoke up as the family passed around plates of steaming food. "For my school project, I thought it'd be fun to do a genealogy test," she said, her voice tinged with excitement. "We could all take part and see what cool stuff we discover about our family history." The younger siblings buzzed with enthusiasm, tossing out wild guesses about their heritage. Daniel smiled warmly at his daughter. "That sounds like a wonderful idea. It'll be fun for all of us." Rachel's smile wavered. She reached for her glass of water, her hand trembling slightly. "I don't know, Emma," she said hesitantly. "Sometimes those tests, they're not always accurate, and they can bring up things better left alone." Samuel, seated at the head of the table, gave Rachel a sharp glance but said nothing. "Come on, Rachel," Daniel said, brushing off her concern. "It's just a harmless project. Besides, we have nothing to hide, right?" He placed a reassuring hand on hers, his smile gentle. After a long pause, Rachel nodded. "All right," she said softly, her voice almost inaudible. Weeks later, the DNA results arrived, sparking a flurry of excitement. Gathered around the family computer, the Cross family eagerly scrolled through their genetic findings. Ancestral roots, distant relatives, and historical tidbits filled the screen. But as Daniel continued to read, his brow furrowed. "Wait a second," he said, leaning closer. "This says I'm not a match as the biological father to any of the kids." A nervous laugh escaped him. "That has to be a mistake, right?" Rachel's face went pale, her hands gripping the back of a chair for support. Samuel remained eerily calm, sipping his coffee in silence. "It's probably just a glitch," Daniel said, forcing a smile. "I'll call the company and get it sorted out." Over the next few days, Daniel contacted the testing company, explaining the error. Each call ended with reassurances that they would investigate further. But when the company's final report came in, it left Daniel reeling. "We've verified the results multiple times," the representative explained. "There's no error. The children's biological father is not you. However, the DNA markers match another relative within your sample pool." Daniel's heart sank. His mind raced as he replayed the representative's words. The only other male sample submitted was Samuel's. He hung up, his hand trembling as he clutched the report. Flashes of memory flooded his mind. Samuel's overbearing presence, Rachel's unease during family dinners, her initial hesitation about the DNA test. A horrifying possibility began to take shape. That evening, Daniel walked into the living room where Rachel was folding laundry. He threw the DNA results onto the table, his voice cold and sharp. "Explain this," he demanded. Rachel's eyes darted to the papers, then to Daniel. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice trembling. "The DNA results," Daniel snapped. "They're saying I'm not the father of my children, but they also say the match is someone in my family. Care to explain?" Rachel's face turned ashen. Her grip on the laundry tightened as she sank into the chair. There must be a mistake," she stammered. "Don't lie to me," Daniel's voice rose, his frustration and pain boiling over. "The company confirmed it. There's no mistake, so I'll ask again. Explain this." Rachel broke down, tears streaming down her face. Through ragged sobs, she confessed to a truth she had buried for years, a truth that shattered Daniel's world. Early in their marriage, Samuel had coerced Rachel into a relationship. Using his position of authority and their shared faith, he had manipulated her into silence. The abuse had continued for years, leaving Rachel feeling trapped and powerless. All 5 children, Rachel admitted, were Samuel's biological offspring. Daniel staggered backward, the weight of her words threatening to crush him. His entire life, his marriage, his family, his faith, was a lie. The man he had idolized, the father who had guided him, was a monster. Without a word, Daniel stormed out of the house. He drove aimlessly through the quiet streets of their Texas town, his mind a storm of disbelief and rage. How could the people he trusted most betray him so completely? How could Samuel, the man who had shaped his moral compass, destroy everything he held sacred? As dawn broke, Daniel parked his car by a quiet lake. Staring into the still waters, his anguish began to transform into something colder, something sharper. The man who had spent his life preaching forgiveness now felt the embers of vengeance burning within him. What would you do if your entire world crumbled in a single moment? Could you forgive, or would the weight of betrayal drive you to darkness? Let us know in the comments below. The days following the DNA revelation were a blur of silence and tension in the Cross household. Daniel Cross, the man once revered as a pillar of strength and faith in his Texas community, now sat as a shadow of himself, staring blankly at the family Bible on the coffee table. Rachel, his wife, tiptoed around him, her face pale and eyes swollen from days of crying. Their children sensed the shift, their usual laughter replaced by whispers and uneasy glances. Daniel's mind raced endlessly. The DNA results were undeniable. The children he had raised, loved, and cherished weren't biologically his. The trust he had placed in Rachel now felt like a cruel joke, but the most excruciating thought of all was the implication that Samuel Cross, his father and lifelong mentor, was the man behind this betrayal. How could Samuel, a man who had taught him the very values of love and faith, be capable of such a vile act? One night, as the household slept, Daniel retreated to the garage, his sanctuary for quiet reflection. He paced back and forth, clenching and unclenching his fists as the questions clawed at his sanity. Why did this happen? How long had Rachel been hiding this? Why didn't she tell me? His mind played cruel tricks, replaying every interaction between Rachel and Samuel with newfound suspicion. The way Samuel had always been unusually present in their lives. The occasional moments Rachel had seemed uncomfortable during family dinners. Signs he had ignored, trusting that his family was built on solid rock. Daniel couldn't keep his turmoil inside any longer. The following evening, after putting the children to bed, Daniel confronted Rachel in the living room. The tension between them was thick, the air heavy with unspoken accusations. "Tell me the truth, Rachel," Daniel began, his voice low and trembling. "How long has this been going on?" Rachel froze, her hand tightening around the edge of the sofa. "Daniel, "I don't know what you're talking about," she said weakly, though her trembling voice betrayed her. "Don't lie to me," Daniel roared, his fist slamming onto the coffee table. "The DNA results don't lie, and the only other man it could match is my father." Rachel broke down, her sobs filling the room. "I didn't know how to tell you," she whispered between gasps for air. "I was trapped. I didn't have a choice." Her words made Daniel's stomach churn. "What do you mean you didn't have a choice?" Through tears, Rachel confessed a harrowing truth that shattered Daniel's world further. Early in their marriage, Samuel had coerced her into a relationship, using his authority and position within the family and church to manipulate her. She had kept quiet out of fear and shame, thinking it was the only way to protect Daniel and the children. Daniel's heart broke, not just for himself, but for Rachel. Yet the rage bubbling within him was uncontrollable. He wanted answers. No, he needed them. From the man he had once called his father. The next morning, Daniel drove to Samuel's house, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Samuel greeted him at the door with his usual composed demeanor, but Daniel could see a flicker of unease in his father's eyes. "Daniel," Samuel began, his voice calm, "to what do I owe this visit?" Daniel didn't respond. Instead, he shoved the DNA results into Samuel's chest. "Explain this," he demanded, his voice trembling with rage. Samuel's eyes darted to the paper, then back to Daniel. His expression didn't waver, but his voice faltered slightly. "I don't know what you're implying, son." "Don't lie to me," Daniel bellowed, his voice echoing through the house. "Rachel told me everything. You manipulated her. You stole my family, my life." For the first time, Samuel's facade cracked. His shoulders sagged, and he let out a long sigh. "I didn't mean for it to happen this way," he said quietly, his voice void of remorse. "But what's done is done. You have to move on." "Move on," Daniel hissed, his face inches from Samuel's. "You think I can move on from this? From the fact that my father is a monster?" Samuel straightened his posture, his voice regaining its usual authoritative tone. "Watch how you speak to me, Daniel. I am still your father, and I've done more for this family than you'll ever know." But Samuel's words only fueled Daniel's anger. Without another word, Daniel stormed out of the house, his vision blurred with fury and betrayal. Back at the Cross family residence, Daniel's children could sense something was wrong. Emma, the eldest, approached her mother cautiously. "Mom, is Dad okay?" she asked, her voice tinged with worry. Rachel forced a weak smile. "He's just going through something. But don't worry, sweetheart. Everything will be fine." But Rachel knew that wasn't true. She could see the fire in Daniel's eyes, the way his movements had become sharper, more erratic. She feared what he might do next, especially now that the truth was out in the open. The Cross family's once unbreakable bond was now fractured beyond repair. Samuel's betrayal, Rachel's silence, and Daniel's consuming rage had created a storm that could not be contained. But the question loomed, how far would Daniel go to seek justice? What do you think? Could you forgive such a betrayal, or is revenge inevitable in a situation like this? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The days that followed Samuel's confession were unlike anything Daniel had ever experienced. The once sturdy foundation of his life, the unwavering faith in family, the certainty of his father's righteousness, crumbled to dust. Each breath felt heavier. Each glance at his children was both a reminder of his love for them and a dagger of betrayal. The Cross family's home, once filled with warmth and laughter, now echoed with an unbearable silence. Rachel avoided Daniel's gaze, haunted by the weight of her confession. The children, sensing the tension, stayed in their rooms, confused and afraid. And Daniel? He was a man barely holding himself together, his mind a battlefield of rage, sorrow, and despair. Late one night, Daniel sat alone in the living room, a bottle of whiskey in one hand and his Bible in the other. His eyes scanned the pages, searching for answers, for guidance, but the words seemed foreign, meaningless. "Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord," he whispered to himself, his voice trembling. But he couldn't find solace in the scripture. God's justice felt too far away, too detached. Daniel wanted retribution now, something tangible to ease the unbearable pain. As he sat there, the memories of Samuel's calm, unapologetic demeanor replayed in his mind, stoking the embers of his fury into an uncontrollable blaze. The thought of Samuel sitting comfortably in his home, unrepentant, was too much to bear. Daniel stood abruptly, the bottle of whiskey smashing to the floor. His breaths were shallow and erratic, his fists clenched so tightly that his nails dug into his palms. He knew what he had to do. That same night, Daniel returned to Samuel's house, his mind consumed by a singular purpose. The air was heavy with the scent of rain as he approached the door, his footsteps deliberate and slow. Samuel opened it with a frown, his expression tinged with annoyance. "Daniel, it's late. What are you?" But Samuel didn't get a chance to finish. Daniel shoved him back into the house, slamming the door shut behind him. "This ends tonight," Daniel growled, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. Samuel stumbled but quickly straightened himself, his face hardening. "You've lost your mind," he spat. "Go home before you do something you'll regret." "Regret?" Daniel's laugh was hollow, almost maniacal. "You ruined my family. You betrayed everything I believed in. Do you think I'll regret making you pay for that?" Samuel took a step back, his bravado faltering. "You're a preacher, Daniel, a man of God. Don't let anger destroy you." But Daniel was past reasoning. Years of bottled emotions exploded all at once as he lunged at his father, tackling him to the ground. The two men wrestled, their struggle crashing into furniture and knocking over lamps. Samuel managed to push Daniel off momentarily, scrambling to his feet. "This isn't you, son," he panted, his voice tinged with fear. "Don't let hate consume you." "You don't get to call me that," Daniel roared, grabbing a heavy candlestick from the nearby mantel. "You don't get to speak to me as if you ever cared about me." The blow came swiftly, the candlestick connecting with Samuel's temple. He crumpled to the floor, groaning in pain. But Daniel wasn't done. Years of betrayal, pain, and humiliation fueled his actions as he struck again and again, the room filling with the sickening sound of metal meeting flesh. Finally, Samuel lay still, blood pooling beneath him. Daniel stood over the lifeless body of his father, the candlestick slipping from his trembling hands. He staggered backward, his chest heaving as the reality of what he'd done began to sink in. When Daniel returned home, his clothes were soaked in rain and blood. Rachel was waiting in the living room, her face pale and tear-streaked. The sight of him made her gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. "Daniel, what have you done?" she whispered, her voice breaking. Daniel didn't answer. He simply collapsed onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. "It's over," he muttered. "He can't hurt us anymore." Rachel sank to the floor, her sobs echoing through the room. "What about the children?" she cried. "What do we tell them? What happens to us now?" Daniel looked up at her, his eyes hollow. "I don't know," he admitted. I couldn't let him win." But there was no victory in what he'd done, only emptiness. The aftermath of Samuel's murder sent shockwaves through the community. When police arrived at Samuel's house the next morning, responding to a concerned neighbor's call, they found Daniel sitting on the front steps, his bloodied hands resting in his lap. He didn't resist when they arrested him, his expression blank and resigned. At the police station, Daniel confessed to everything. He didn't try to justify his actions or plead for mercy. "He betrayed my family," he said simply, "and I couldn't let him get away with it." The community that once revered Daniel was left reeling. How could a man so dedicated to faith and family commit such a heinous act? The congregation he had led for years was split between those who saw him as a victim of unimaginable betrayal and those who condemned him as a man who had abandoned God's teachings. Rachel and the children were left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives. The cross name, once synonymous with integrity and faith, became a source of shame and scandal. The children, torn between love for their father and horror at his actions, struggled to make sense of it all. Rachel eventually moved away with the children, seeking a fresh start far from the shadow of their family's tragedy. But the scars of what had happened would remain with them forever. In his prison cell, Daniel spent his days reading the Bible, searching for redemption. But the words that once brought him comfort now felt hollow. He had taken justice into his own hands, and the weight of that decision would stay with him for the rest of his life. Do you think Daniel's actions were justified, or did his anger lead him down a path from which there was no return? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. The years in prison passed slowly for Daniel Cross, each day blending into the next. The stark walls of his cell mirrored the emptiness within him, a void left by his family's betrayal and his own devastating choices. For a man who had once been the pillar of faith in his community, the isolation was both punishment and penance. But even in the bleakness of his confinement, Daniel sought something resembling redemption. One night, as the prison lights dimmed, Daniel sat on his cot with his worn Bible in his hands. The pages were tattered, many marked with notes from sermons he had preached in a different life. He flipped through the familiar verses, searching for answers, for solace, for something that could explain how he had fallen so far. His thoughts wandered to his children: Emma, Liam, Ethan, Chloe, and Mason. He wondered how they were, what they had grown into, and whether they could ever forgive him. He thought of Rachel, too, her love for him tarnished, but, he hoped, not entirely erased. They had been his light, and he had extinguished it in a fit of uncontrollable rage. One verse caught his eye, Romans 12:21. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Daniel's throat tightened. He had failed that test spectacularly, allowing the evil of betrayal to consume him. But was it too late to find a sliver of goodness within himself? Could he use what remained of his life to make amends? The following day, Daniel approached the prison chaplain, a kind-eyed man named Father Carter. I want to help, Daniel said simply, his voice heavy with resolve. Father Carter studied him for a moment before nodding. There's always room for those seeking redemption. With the chaplain's guidance, Daniel began leading Bible study sessions for his fellow inmates. At first, many were skeptical of the disgraced preacher, but his raw honesty about his failings and his genuine desire to help others drew them in. Daniel spoke not as a man of righteousness, but as one who had fallen deeply and was trying, step by painful step, to climb back toward the light. His words resonated in the dim chapel, the stories of betrayal, rage, and regret, striking chords with men who had their own burdens to bear. Slowly the sessions grew in number, and the room that once echoed with the emptiness of lost souls began to fill with the murmurs of hope and forgiveness. Outside the prison, life continued for Rachel and the children. Moving to a new town had been necessary but painful. The cross name carried a heavy shadow, and Rachel worked tirelessly to shield her children from the whispers of the past. Yet the scars were unavoidable. Emma, the eldest, had taken on the role of protector for her younger siblings. At 20, she carried the weight of their family's story on her shoulders, determined to break free from its grip. She visited Daniel once, out of a mixture of anger and longing. In the sterile visiting room, she sat across from her father, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "Why?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why did you have to destroy everything?" Daniel looked at her, his own voice faltering. "I was blinded, Emma. by anger, by betrayal. I thought I was protecting you. Tears welled in her eyes. Protecting us. You left us, Dad. You left us with nothing. Daniel's heart shattered, but he didn't try to defend himself. You're right, he admitted. I failed you. I failed all of you. But if I spend the rest of my life trying to atone, it still won't be enough. I just hope, one day, you'll see that I never stopped loving you. Emma left without saying another word, but Daniel noticed her hesitation at the door, the slightest turn of her head as if she wanted to look back. Over time, Daniel's story began to take on a different meaning within the prison. He became a mentor, a counselor, someone who helped others face their own demons. Yet, he never let himself forget the cost of his redemption. Each session, each prayer, was a step toward reconciling with the man he had been and the man he hoped to become. In his final years, Daniel wrote letters to each of his children. In them, he recounted their childhood memories, apologized for his failures, and shared his hopes for their futures. These letters were his way of reaching out, of trying to bridge the chasm he had created. When Daniel Cross passed away in his cell at the age of 64, the prison chapel was filled with men whose lives he had touched. Father Carter delivered the eulogy, speaking of a man who had fallen, but had spent the rest of his life trying to rise again. Daniel Cross was a flawed man, like all of us, Father Carter said, but he taught us that even in the depths of our mistakes, we can seek redemption. And that redemption is not about erasing the past, it's about choosing to do good in the time we have left. Years later, Emma stumbled upon one of her father's letters while cleaning out old boxes. She sat on the floor of her apartment, tears streaming down her face as she read his words of regret and love. For the first time, she allowed herself to grieve, not just for what she had lost, but for the man her father had been trying to become. What about you? Do you believe redemption is possible, even for someone who has committed unforgivable acts? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that make us question the boundaries of forgiveness and humanity.